A weed is just a plant growing somewhere where you don't want it to grow. So it's not a weed because it's a nettle. It's not a weed because it's a Russian vine that's growing out there. It's just a weed because you've planted something in a piece of land, like maybe roses. You've put all roses in your little garden, and nettles suddenly appear, partly because the nettle seed was in the ground before you put the roses in there. The nettle seed germinates and comes up. We then call them a weed because they're growing when you only wanted the roses to grow. Maybe you thought you had some sort of authority over that piece of land and only the things you want in there can grow in there. You decided to plant a rose garden, nettles have come up, nettles are weeds. But if you are a herbalist and you want to grow nettle because you want to be able to make nettle tea, then the plant that you want to grow is nettle, and that's not a weed. And if a rose came up in your patch where you were growing you probably wouldn't just have nettle tea, you'd have all sorts of different plants to make teas from, or tisanes or whatever you want to call them. Then the other plant would be the interloper plant or the weed, because that's the plant that you don't want growing there. Mm-hmm. So the only thing really that determines whether a thing is a weed or is considered a weed is whether or not you want it growing there. Mm-hmm. It's not that it has weediness in itself.
Yeah.
I don't know, I was going to say, I guess every plant has some sort of use for something, but I don't think you could really check that because apart from anything else, plants are becoming extinct so quickly that you probably couldn't check that, but anyway. I would be quite happy for this one, which we call lady's bed straw, to be here, but I don't want this one. This is geum, which is a native plant, by the way, and that is potentilla, and I don't want those because they will take over, and soon there'll be nothing else but them, and that's why even people like me, who quite like a lot of wild plants, will try to eliminate some of them, and I spend hours in here removing things like that. Some plants ruin your balance because they want to be the only plant in the world, and so if you want to have a variety of plants, you have to get rid of the ones which will outcompete all the others. Probably it's more virile and more fertile, so all its seeds germinate probably, and every single little interstice would be filled with this plant eventually, and there wouldn't be any spaces for the less vigorous plants to grow. And for me, the ideal growing community is as many different plants together growing in a community, sharing the spaces as possible. And that's why I consider some plants to be weeds, because they will try and outcompete, use more of the resources just for themselves. So they have to go. It's one of the problems in gardening. Whatever piece of land you've got, it's got good things about it, but it's got not so good things about it, and you have to try and work out which plants that you really like and that you want to grow, or that you think you should grow, will grow in the conditions that you've got. And this small garden is particularly difficult because it's very shady most of the time. I think in the main it's been a matter of finding things that will grow here, because the conditions are so harsh, that we like. And that a series of different people like, because somebody liked that one, but I don't like that very much, but I'm quite sure I've got lots of things in here that he doesn't like very much too. We've got a little lemon tree there, which is very unusual to have outside in London or in England. This is the lemon tree.
Yeah.
Very, very proud
It's
of
lovely.
it. Sweet woodruff, that's the one, that's the weed which I allow to grow in here. Partly because it smells nice. When it gets flowers on it, it smells nice. And it won't try to encroach on other plants. It will fill up any empty spaces it can find, but it will grow quite happily with other plants, as it is doing now. This one is a clematis that flowers in winter with scented flowers.
Yeah.
It's almondii. It's meant to smell a bit like almond. Verbena bonariensis, and it's become quite fashionable over the last 5 or 6 years in British gardens. In English we call them cottage garden plants, a plant that poor people would have grown in their gardens. The whole of Australia smells like that. Smells like tea tree and lemon.
So this can be used for sort of oil making?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about bottle brush. Certainly tea tree can. It's similar in many ways. It's evergreen. It's got these very aromatic leaves. Sweet compared to some domestic plums, but and juicy or whatever they like about them. But there will come a day when the tree is covered in birds, and and even great big pigeons. They sit up there and they eat and eat and eat, and you can see them getting drunk. One of these days, one of them is going to fall out of the tree, because they must